All right, today I wanted to talk about Less Than Zero by Bret Easton Ellis, which is a interesting book. It is by the same guy who did American Psycho, which if you are familiar with that movie, you kind of understand the vein that this guy is writing in, which is about a complete psychopath who murders, abuses, and does all this terrible stuff, and it's meant as a commentary on kind of the almost a parody on the Wall Street sort of environment from there. And so I was curious about Less Than Zero because it seemed to be less violent than American Psycho. I do have trouble with some aspects, more of the torturing, abusive types of violence as opposed to like just warfare, World War II ones. So I wanted to get it, and I wanted to see what it was, because the interesting thing about this story, and let me know in the below if you guys have ever read or been interested, or a story caught your eye where it's just completely out there. It's not something you would normally read. It's kind of something that just is exploring something, and it's well written enough or well done enough to where you're curious, almost like a Lolita style one, where it covers really dark and terrible subject matter, but because of the way it's written and everything like that, it still garners interest and is still widely well known. Not that anyone is necessarily, hopefully no one is condoning the morality in the story or what's happening in the story, but there is this kind of horrific fascination that comes along with some of these stories where we're trying to figure out and understand what's going on. So yeah, put it below if there's a story that caught your eye like that. So Less Than Zero is largely what I would describe about terrible people, which is kind of a reductive way, but we'll go into more detail from there. And it's about people who are lost, and aimless is more of the word I would use. There's just no point completely, and we understand quickly, why and how these people came to be this way is because they're utterly devoid of what most of us would consider, necessary for being regular humans. Devoid. For regular humans, I've grown up middle class my whole life, which has meant a number of things. It means, or lower middle class, it means used cars, infrequent vacations, maybe short vacations, not necessarily the nicest vacations, but when you're young, you don't really know or care. A lot of beans and rice, and the whole deal from there. There's kind of this expectation that I would also need to get a job, which means just imagine how much of your life is devoted to trying to figure this question out. A job, which means I need a career to make enough money, and then hopefully I will be happy as well, but most importantly is not starving to death from there. But that said, please don't hear me complaining. I've had an amazing life. But that's the reality of it. And to be fair, you could almost argue, and probably easily argue, that there is an aspect of this where it's because of the struggle. That's how I've made it this far. It's never overwhelmed me. There's certain stories where I'll hear people will go through, terrible things that cause trauma or whatnot, and it's kind of a wonder about how they ever came out the other side. And one thing with mine is that it's never been overwhelming. It's been kind of the good stress, the stress that I've known how to handle because I had a support system, or I'd seen other people, or been taught, how to handle these situations. But then this is what this story expands on and kind of explores this: what if I didn't have this? What if I stayed inside and watched TV? Because it didn't really matter what I did from there. What is the point of a summer job? There's a scene in Less Than Zero where the dad is sitting, he's sitting on the couch, and they're all there enjoying pretend it's a fancy, super expensive couch. Lots of dollar signs from there. And they're all having Christmas, with their little presents and stuff like that. The main character, Clay, and his 2 sisters and his mom. The mom is completely estranged from the dad. And the dad's sitting there, and he hasn't planned anything ahead of time, and he is out writing checks to his children. So he's got his checkbook, and he's writing, and you really kind of understand that's the sum of their relationship. He is a checkbook from there. And it kind of is a great scene in terms of really exploring, or giving exposition to what their relationship is. Where the dad is there, he writes checks. That's his contribution. He's completely out of touch from his kids. They're completely devoid of everything. It's just completely separate. And he's writing checks, and it's a question of interesting. It's like, let's say we don't know how much the check is, but it's presumably a lot of money, because Clay, the main character, actually lends a lot of money to one of his friends, and he kind of wants his money back, but it's more of just a, you should pay me back. He doesn't really there's no need for the money, because he has plenty. But so this checkbook, because there's a dollar amount where that check is getting written for, which largely means that, hey, a summer job or a high school job or a job out of closet or out of college, it just makes this utterly irrelevant. There's a dollar amount where if you get that checkbook, it kind of makes everything else, shoot, what is it, $7.25 an hour? Or back then when the book is written is in the 80s. It's set in the 80s, I think 84, 85 or somewhere around there. Maybe it was minimum wage was probably, I don't know, $5 or something like that an hour. There's a check. That check could basically make this just seem utterly useless, because now you suddenly have more money. Now you suddenly have more money than most people have in their whole life. There's a point where it's so much money to where this idea of even getting a summer job never happens, because what's the point? There is no point. So when you're growing up, when you're 10 years old or 12 years old, this thought just doesn't even enter your head. There's no point. And so if you take this even further, what's the point of getting out of bed? Because there's just no point. In terms of there's no drive, there is no struggle, there is nothing that's actually pushing anyone to do anything. And this is kind of the atmosphere that the story takes on, is because you have all these different characters, and most of them are kind of growing up in the similar milieu or social environment, where their parents are incredibly wealthy, but also don't really pay attention to their kids at all. There's a few characters who are like, yes, my mom is overseas with some photographer, world famous photographer. Essentially, they're just on vacations 24/7, and they leave their kids at home and don't call. They don't see them. There's no connection at all between these people. And this is not to say that all rich people are like this. It's just that these are. And I think this is something that you do run into more in that regard from there. And so the story follows our main character, Clay, and each of them, in terms of the way the story is structured, this is probably one of the most interesting things that I did enjoy was how they structured it. So usually there's this idea of, okay, we're going to do chapters, and it's going to be like 15 to 30 pages per chapter, and maybe we'll switch point of view, so you kind of have like point of view A and B, and kind of A will cover this part, B will cover this one, and then maybe we'll have C up here, which could be like the antagonist. This is antagonist, and then this is main character A, main character B, and then they kind of, alternate from here, so you can have this jump. And this is the chapters are about 10 to 15, 30 pages, so you can really develop, encounters, a fight, a romance. You can really develop these aspects with it. So, and this is what you usually expect. TV shows follow the same thing. Law and Order would always do them, where they're following the cops, and then and then the prosecution. They would kind of do this jump back and forth, so you could have, right when this is getting interesting, it cuts, and then you want to see what happens here, so then you're going to wait to watch through this part, and then it cuts back, and then this part starts to get interesting, so then you got to wait to this one, and it kind of zigzag ping pongs, TikToks your way through there. But what this does is the stories, I would almost call them vignettes, these little small scenes, and they're really usually about 3 to 4 pages. They're really, really short. And so what it does is it makes the book incredibly digestible in terms of that no scene really lasts too long, because it's just these little snapshots, and it really goes into fitting the narrative and structure and atmosphere for the book, because the main character, Clay, will understand very quickly, is going through in a drugged up haze. He's kind of, the biggest questions in his life are, do I do cocaine now or later? That's basically all of his decisions are. And so an example of this will be, they'll come to a party, and Clay will be sitting there, and he's kind of, like this. He's just kind of like, just sitting here, not really enjoying it. He's kind of making this face. And then we'll have another dude over here who's making this face. And he'll say something like, "Whoa, dude," and he'll respond. And in the narrator's, Clay's head, we're just like, I didn't hear anything. So we'll say, "What?" And then he'll respond again like, "Whoa, dude." And it's this really monotonous, kind of meaningless dialogue. You see, there is no human connection going on from here. And then Clay will pretend, and he'll be like, "Yeah," and he'll kind of nod. And then this guy would be like, "You okay? You look really pale, probably because you may be on drugs, but you okay?" And he'll go, "Yeah." And then he'll nod again. And then that's the conversation. And it's this really just completely devoid of human connection sort of dialogue. And then the scene will end, and then he'll leave the party, and then it just ends. The scene ends. But what it means is that it really helps keep everything interesting and making it readable. It's the same kind of cheat sheet that you'll do where, you'll have a paragraph. If you take a paragraph, that's the reason why we even do paragraph breaks in the spacing, is to help break it up, because you'll have a paragraph and it'll go like this. And this is starting to look more and more and more and more intimidating the longer it goes on, versus this, where it's like, we're spacing this out so that it looks a lot more readable. Even if this, see, I'm running out of room. Even if this actually goes on longer than the first one, it's this spacing that really makes it look a lot more inviting and open. You can get through it. So it's the same thing in terms of on YouTube, where it's like, I can't watch a 10-minute video, but I can watch 430-second clips or something like that, or even 1-minute clips, something where, if you break it into smaller pieces, it really makes it digestible. And this is what the story does. And this is an interesting way it writes, where it is first-person viewer, where you kind of go through this section from here to here, and it really just kind of takes you through this malaise from here. And as far as most of the plot is involved, it's kind of funny, because it's almost the most interesting part for me was the exploration of this, world of extreme wealth, utterly devoid of any sort of struggle, or also completely devoid of any real connection. Because Clay is running around and going around town. He has his longtime girlfriend, Blair, but he also is cheating on her, and he's, he kind of knows that she's cheating on him with other guys, and you come to find out that he actually, because he's back from the East Coast, he's back from Massachusetts or so, from the East Coast, and he never really called her. And even now, he doesn't see them as an item. They're not girlfriend, boyfriend. His sometime girlfriend, and she even thinks that they're dating, but he kind of tells everyone else around them that they're not really dating. It's just this kind of continual, he keeps her close when he wants her, but then when he doesn't, he just ignores her. And it's this kind of back and forth, and it seems to bother her, but then seems to not. And it's just this really bizarre world that they're living in. And this is what kind of they takes them to. So they'll go to a party, and then they'll be there with Kim and I think Elena, and they'll be talking about people. They'll be bad talking people, and they just kind of go from place to place and just talk and have parties and waste time. No one really seems to be enjoying themselves, if I'm honest. Everyone seems to just be going through these sorts of motions from here. The other funny thing, which was just interesting, because it's very much before cell phones, because you'll call one house to try and see if anyone's there, and you'll have to memorize numbers, and they'll be like, no, we don't know where this guy is. He's either at this other house or he's at this other house. But we don't know where he is. And so Clay will go wandering around trying to find his friends, and his friends are worse people than him by far. And again, I'm being kind of vague in terms of how terrible they are, because I didn't want this to be too dark of a video or anything like that. But you can read the plot on Wikipedia, and it'll give you an idea as far as how dark the story goes. But the thing is, Clay is always on this outside. He's always on the outside. He's oftentimes disgusted or disturbed, you're hoping, by some of the actions of his friends, but he does nothing. He's completely apathetic. He's kind of wandering through life with this screen, this drug haze screen, to where there is actually no sort of human connection. He's here, and there's this giant, just walled off screen, with the light sheen or whatever, that's just kind of blocking him from everyone else. And this keeps him from making any sort of real connection or doing anything. And he's just kind of sitting there, and then that's it. And that kind of goes to. And most of the plot is fairly irrelevant to some degree. There is somewhat of kind of a building climax and everything like that. It kind of focuses around his friend Julian, who he keeps trying to find, who keeps running around and disappearing and coming back and disappearing and everything like that, who he ends up lending him a lot of money, and they try to get his Clay tries to get his money back, but it's like, you never get the sense that Clay actually needs the money. It's just kind of like hey, I gave you money, can you give it back? And Julian's like torn up about oh man, I'll get it to you later, or hey, what does it matter? What does the money matter? And he's like, what are you talking about? Give me my money back. And it's just very much kind of like you should do it. You should do this sort of deal. There's not really any sort of, I need this money to live, because again, if he just asked his dad for more money, he would write him another check for $1 gazillion, because his dad is a studio executive from here. And you just have this whole environment. But yeah, let me go ahead. I'm going to get have it on digital, and let's read a section just to give an idea of what the story is like. All right, my father's offices are in Century City. I wait around for him in the large, expensively furnished reception room and hang out with the secretaries, flirting with this really pretty blonde one. It doesn't bother me that my father leaves me waiting there for 30 minutes while he's in some meeting, and then asks me why I'm late. I don't really want to go to lunch today. I would rather be at the beach or sleeping or out by the pool, but I'm pretty nice, and I smile and nod and pretend to listen to all his questions about college, and I answer them pretty sincerely. And it doesn't embarrass me a whole lot that while on the way to Mom Mason, he puts the top of the 450 down and plays a Bob Seger tape, as if this is some sort of weird gesture of communication. It also doesn't make me angry that at lunch my father talks with a lot of businessmen, people he deals with in the film industry, who stop by our table, and that I'm introduced only as my son, and the businessmen all began to look the same, and I began to wish that I had brought the rest of the Coke. My father looks pretty healthy, if you don't look at him for too long. He's completely tan and has had a hair transplant in Palm Springs 2 weeks ago. And he has pretty much a full head of blondish hair. He also had his face lifted. I'd gone to see him at Sinai when he had it done, and remember seeing his face covered in bandages and how he would keep touching them lightly. Why aren't you having the usual? I ask, actually interested after we order. He smiles, showing off the caps. Nutritionist won't allow it. Oh. How's your mother? He asks calmly. She's fine. Is she really feeling fine? Yes. She's really feeling fine. I'm tempted for a moment to tell him about the Ferrari parked at the driveway. Are you sure? There's nothing to worry about. That's good. He pauses. Is she still seeing that Dr. Crane? Uh-huh. That's good. There's a pause. Another businessman stops by, then leaves. Well, Clay, what do you want for Christmas? Nothing, I say after a while. Do you want your subscription to Variety renewed? It already is. Another pause. Do you need money? No. I tell him, knowing that maybe he'll slip me some later outside Ma Maison, or perhaps on the way back to his office. You look thin, he says. And pale. It's the drugs, I mumble. I didn't quite hear that. I look at him and say, I've gained 5 pounds since I've been back home. Oh, he says, and pours himself a glass of wine. Some other business guy drops by after he leaves. My father turns to me and asks, do you want to go to Palm Springs for Christmas? And that's the chapter. And it's so bizarre because it's just these little bitty sections that you kind of go through. And it's just, I found it really interesting to go through in terms of that regard. I thought it was a very easy, what I would classify as an easy read in that regard. So, I would definitely recommend reading it if you don't mind reading stuff about terrible people in terms of the terrible things they do. It doesn't usually get too graphic or explicitly graphic, but the implied and the before described scenes get incredibly dark. So please proceed with caution. Because my wife and I differ very much in the stories we like to read, because I like to explore some of these ideas, and for her, it's more, she wants good guys and happy endings. That's what she wants out of a story. That is what a good story is all about from there. And yeah, so it's about terrible people, and terrible people that you would almost feel bad for if they weren't so bad. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this one, and I'll see you in the next.